In around 2000 BC, the Minoans started their first Greek civilizations. About 1628 BC, a volcano erupted and destroyed many of the cities in Crete. In about 1400 BC, the Mycenaeans took advantage of this and defeated the Minoans, taking over their civilizations.
In around the 6th century BC, Xerxes ruled Persia.
Yeah, I did.
At this time, this was most of the Middle East and northern Africa. However, Xerxes didn't control Greece or most of Europe. Greece had grown to become a powerful empire, but not quite as powerful as Xerxes.
If I defeat and take over Sparta and Athens, then I can take over more of Europe more easily.
The Greeks created myths to tell stories about gods, goddesses, and heroes. All of the gods lived on Mount Olympus in northern Greece. Each god had a different ability. For example, Athena, Zeus's daughter, was protector of wisdom and womanly goodness, as well as the protector of city-states. Athens was named so in her honor.
The people also believed that the gods talked to priests at temples, like places called oracles. People would go to oracles to ask questions about the future.
Which is crazy, because no one can tell the future.
The Greeks believed in pleasing the gods as well. They used the Olympics to please the gods. The Olympics were held every 4 years to honor Zeus.
Only the men could watch and compete in the Olympics. Different events included javelin, discus, foot racing, boxing, and wrestling.
Athens was very different than Sparta. It was very unfertile, so they relied on trading, so their navy was...
In the late 1100s BC, people from the north conquered the Peloponnesus. These people were called Helots. They also conquered Sparta, which was an open valley.
Sparta had 3 social groups: the equals, whose ancestors were the invaders, half-citizens who were given a majority of rights, but not all, and the Helots, who were slaves.
Sparta's government had 2 rulers, one for war and one for matters within Sparta. There was a council of elders who proposed laws and served as a criminal court.
There was also another assembly of men who would decide whether the laws the council proposed should be laws or not. They also elected 5 ephors for a year-long term.
Athens was very different than Sparta. It was very unfertile, so they relied on trading so that their navy was strong.
But that will only get you so far.
Athens divided up into groups of society from rich aristocrats to poor farmers and slaves.
Greeks love their slaves. A little like the caste system. Seems a little judgmental.
Their government was an aristocrat, so you had to own land to hold office, and elected 9 archons who held office for 1 year each.
Seems confusing.
The law wasn't actually written down until Draco, an archon, created the first written law in 1621 BC, but they were very harsh, and the rich became more rich and the poor became more poor, making people become slaves to pay off their debt.
More slaves.
But Solon, in 594 BC, finally fixed the problems by having his own year of jubilee and canceling all debt and outlawing slavery.
About time.
But the good times didn't last long, because in 546 to 527, Pisistratus ruled as a tyrant.
But in 507, Cleisthenes turned Greece into a direct democracy, which is where citizens vote. Unlikely others that are indirect were there as representatives.
Most Athenians were farmers who grew olives, figs, and grapes.
So they were basically rednecks.
Greeks valued married life and often had arranged marriage, but sometimes when the family couldn't afford a baby, they just left it on the street to die.
Family values.
At 18, Athenian men received military training.
Yet it isn't enough because we are still better.
Greeks valued married life and often had arranged marriages, but sometimes when the family couldn't afford a baby, they just left it on the street to die.
Family values.
At age 18, Athenian men received military training.
Yet it isn't enough because we're still better.
And in 400 BC, Greece entered a golden age of Greek culture where they spent a lot of time on architecture.
But it was all petty compared to my hall of 100 columns.
like the Parthenon, which is considered the finest example of Greek architecture.
Greek architecture, not Persian, so it's not that impressive.
In about 480 BC, Persia began building the biggest army in the world at that time.
In 500 BC, a war broke out among the Greeks and Persians, known as the Persian War.
In 480 BC, Xerxes led a huge army to fight against Greece. The Spartans were badly outnumbered, but they fought until they were all dead. Then they made their way to Athens.
They destroyed Athens, but Themistocles tricked Xerxes into going down the narrow Salamis
I
Strait
wasn't tricked at all.
when the Persians' boats weren't as maneuverable as the Greeks. So a lot of them sunk, and in the end, the Persians lost.
It was a draw.